All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me speak at the conference. We're going to be talking about video game music lesson plans today, how to teach video game music to your students. I love this subject, so let's just jump right in. This is my contact information. My name's Andrew Olmstead, but I'll put that at the end of the slides again so you can write it down then. If you have any questions or any thoughts about what you see today, please reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff. So why teach video game music in the first place? I love Zoltán Kodály, one of my favorite theorists when it came to pedagogy and teaching students. Wrote a lot about how to teach music to young students, of course, but in my experience, most of what he wrote about and said also applies to teaching adults. So he had this idea that the first thing you should teach a student is how to sing or play the music that they already know and love correctly. So years ago, a lot of students would ask me about learning music from TV shows or from film. That still happens, of course. But the last couple of years, I've noticed a huge uptick in students asking for video game music. So in addition to the standard repertoire I would use and technical exercises I give them, we talk about video game music, and I use that to reinforce music theory concepts and ear training specifically. So let's talk about that. What are we going to cover today? So first of all, we'll talk about idiomatic music theory, which is my way of thinking about music theory in general and talking to students about it. We're going to talk about the two parts of video game music that makes it different from, say, opera or country music or something else, right? We're going to come up with a generalized lesson plan that you can use to teach any video game music, basically. And we're going to cover two specific examples that I like to use. And you might be saying, well, hold on, idiomatic music theory, what is that? That's a term that I kind of made up in my own head to think about music theory in a more flexible way. So when I say idiomatic, I mean it's something particular to a style, period, or a group of people, group of composers. And so it means something particular to a certain genre, for example. And when I say music theory, I don't mean how music works, because music theory is not a perfect description of how music works. It's just a useful way to think about music. And there's a lot of different music theories, depending on the culture that you're in or the time frame that you live in. You know, hundreds of years ago, people didn't think about music in the same way we do now. Maybe they used figured bass, for example, in Western music. Or in other cultures, they might have a different way of thinking about it. So there are many ways to use to think about music, and that's important here. I teach students all about scales and form, and even sometimes figured bass if they want to learn early music, right? But it's also important to cover things like orchestration, right? Or things that are culture specific too. So when we combine these ideas, we have a useful way of thinking about music particular to a specific genre. And in this case, it's going to be video games, right? So that's, when I say idiomatic music theory, we have to think about music as the video game composers might think about it, right? Which really isn't all that different from how any other type of music is generated. So what are the benefits of this? Well, it's going to give the students, in my opinion, a more accurate view of how music works and how music is made, right? And a big thing here is that pairing these music theory concepts with specific things in their musical idioms is going to let them remember why music works that way. It's going to help with a retention of music theory ideas that we introduce to them, like cadences or anything else that you're trying to teach your students. It's going to open, well, there's a couple other examples here. I love these aha moments here when students say, oh, I remember that this reminds me of how it worked in the Romantic era when they were thinking about harmony in this way, right? That seems really similar to how this composer is doing this in a completely different idiom. So I love these connections that students are going to make when you teach music theory in this way. So what are the two things about video game music that makes it different from teaching film music or any other type of music? Well, number one is the setting. The setting where the video game is set, or where the player is when they're playing the video game, greatly influences the sound of the video game music, which is true in other mediums too, but in video game music more than anything else, it's a huge factor. Then the other thing is what the player's doing. And so we can go into theoretical reasons why I think these two things are so important. But I think when you listen to the examples that we're going to go over today, it's going to make a lot of sense. Setting and action are the two important parts of video game music to get your students thinking about. So let's talk about the generalized lesson plan. This is the slide. I just put it all up there all at once. If you want to take notes, of course, take a picture of this, a screenshot. This is the slide that you'll be thinking about more than anything else. And I'm going to put the slides up online. I'll probably put these on my own YouTube channel or someplace. And of course, it'll be up on the conference website. So if you have, if you want to look back on this and refer to it, that's totally fine. We're going to talk about, first with the students, you want them to identify the setting or the action, or preferably both. But, having the students focus on one thing at a time, always a good idea. So have them figure out, where is this happening? Is it in a town? Is it on a volcano? Is it in space, right? And then have them identify, what are they doing? Are they fighting a battle? Or are they managing their inventory? Are they solving a puzzle, right? After that, you want them to find music that's related to this type of music. So if it's music that's set in outer space, have them find other video game music, or maybe other music from other mediums, other like film, where it's set in outer space. And then they can, step 3 here, they can compare those musics and see, what do they have in common? What is it about this music that makes it sound like it's in outer space, right? Is it big rumbling sounds followed by silence, implying the void of space? Is it bright shining sounds, kind of like implying, simulating the sound of stars or something like that? I don't know. So when you come back to that, you can reinforce those comparisons with music theory. So you can say, I noticed that both of these settings, they're using this certain scale that we've talked about. Maybe it's a certain mode of the scale. Or maybe there's a certain interval that's really common here. So you can have them use their ear training or their music theory to reinforce these things that they're learning. And if you want to go ahead and have them learn that, they can figure it out by ear, or you can find some sheet music for them. They can learn from there. This talk is very much centered around the music theory and getting them excited about these abstract concepts using something that's very close to the students, like video games. So here's a couple more setting examples. On a mountain, there's going to be a lot of percussion. For some reason, percussion is associated with mountain settings. When you hear music that's set in underwater, it's going to be very lush, very long chords. The harmonies are going to be very interesting for them to try to analyze. Forests, there always seems to be some sort of pan flute or reed instrument. So you can have them analyze instrumentation there, right? And there's lots of ways that these can be modified, right? Don't have them just focus on where they are. You can have them think about when they are in their setting, right? A music that's set in a Christmas environment or around the holidays or in Halloween, it's going to affect the sound quite a bit. Most students will pretty quickly pick up that bells and sleigh bells and carillons, very important for a Christmas sound. If you're underwater, well, I said that underwater was going to be lush and relaxing, but what if you're underwater in a submarine? Suddenly those lush, beautiful harmonies are going to be much more chromatic and condensed, causing a lot of tension. So that's a good thing for them to analyze, right? And you can combine settings together. So maybe they're looking for music in their wooded village setting. Well, have them find music that's also set just in a forest and see, what is it that's different between these songs that make it sound more like a busy, populated, bustling village environment, right? Anyways, action. Here's some specific action examples from real life games, and some of these are going to sound ridiculous. Well, exploring a haunted hotel, that's fair. Fighting terrorists with surgery. I don't know where people come up with these video game ideas, but I love them. And all of these sorts of settings are going to have specific sounds that you might be able to find and compare with other video games. Trying out new clothes is one of my favorite examples. A real student came to me and said, I'm playing this game a lot where you're running around shooting bad guys, but I don't want to learn any of that music. When you're customizing your outfit or maybe changing your hair color, I want to learn the music that's associated with that, because they found it was really relaxing. And in some ways, that music ended up being pretty similar to what you would hear in a department store when you're trying on clothes too. So that was an interesting comparison for us to make. So these are kind of general abstract ideas we've been talking about. Let's do a specific lesson plan that I use to teach students about setting. And we'll talk a little bit about music theory concepts that you're going to hear in different settings. Now, this is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. It came out a little while ago, and it's a racing video game. Now, I love using racing games to teach students about setting. So why? Well, first of all, the activity is always the same. In every racing game, what are you doing? You're driving around in a loop. You're trying to go fast, right? And that's pretty universal among racing games, no matter which one your students have played. Number two, the track, the setting there, it's always different, always in a different environment. So even though the action's the same, the setting's different. And that lets the student focus on that setting. It lets them kind of isolate it. And there's hundreds of games that the students can reach to use to compare. And chances are they've already played something like a racing game before. So I just picked a setting kind of at random. A lot of racing games seem to be set around volcanoes. Sometimes there'll be at least one track that's set in some sort of magma volcano environment. So let's take a look. What makes something sound like a volcano? There's a lot of things here. So you can read through them here while I'm talking. Not a lot. Now, not all of my musical examples here that I'm going to be playing for you are from racing games, but they are all set in volcanoes, and they're all specific games that you can use to recommend that your students listen to. I don't tell students all of this information in advance. That, for example, that chromaticism is really important, or the chord movement, that they're going to be wanting to listen to that bass line or the roots of the chords to hear how they move. I just let them listen to the music themselves, come up with their own conclusions, and then the following lesson come back, and we can analyze what they heard and use those things that they heard to reinforce the music theory that you're already teaching them. So let's listen to some examples. The first one's going to be from Mario Kart 8. So enjoy. All right. So those are just a few musical excerpts. Have your students find their own, or have you can go out yourself and do the same thing maybe before you teach this lesson. Find other video games or other movies, other things that are set in a volcano environment, and compare those musics. You might come up with a completely different set of things that jump out to you. And that's great. That's totally what this exercise is about, critical listening. So that last example was about setting. This next specific example that we're going to do is about action, of course. And I use tennis video games to introduce this, unless the student has some other action that they're interested in. Now, why do I use tennis games? Well, the setting's always the same. Similar to how we use racing games to isolate just the setting so we can focus on that. With tennis games, we can focus on the action. The setting's the same here. It's what I would say is like a resort or a country club type environment, which is a little strange to think about, right? But there's, once again, hundreds of games to compare. Lots of tennis games have been made. Chances are your students have been exposed to one before. And there's more actions involved than you might at first think. You probably think, well, tennis games, most of the time you're going to be playing tennis, right? This is Super Tennis, which was kind of seminal, very important, probably one of the first really good tennis games that was released. And the strange thing about it is when you're actually playing tennis, there's absolutely no sound, or absolutely no music, rather. The only sound you can hear is when you hit the tennis ball. It makes that echoing sound that you'd hear in a real tennis court, so it's very immersive. So where do Super Tennis and many of these other games actually introduce music? Well, it's in what I would call menuing actions. Menuing actions are all the other things you do during a video game that's not actually playing the game. And similar to how I talked about that student earlier who liked changing their clothes and listening to that song, that's one example of a menuing action. Other common ones are selecting your character or your game type. So for example, am I going to be playing a doubles match of tennis or a singles match of tennis, right? When the court first comes up on screen, there's usually a little fanfare to introduce it. When you're playing a tournament, there's usually a little music that plays. Maybe if it's an international tournament, you hear music from each country. And whenever you win or lose a game, a screen pops up with lots of numbers to show your score and how you did. And these screens kind of sound, in general, a lot like the Weather Channel used to, when you turn on TV to check the weather, and there would be all those numbers up there and smooth, relaxing music playing in the background. So the action I want to talk about today is the title screen. What is the title screen of a video game? Well, it's the first thing you see when you turn on the game, first of all. And it has the title of the game displayed. That's why it's called a title screen. So it gets you excited to start playing the actual game. So it's usually very stimulating, exciting, and I think of it like a gift. When you receive a gift, what do you want to do? You want to open it up, see what's inside. That's very much what the title screen is supposed to make you feel, is that you want to start. You want to see what's inside this game. These are all the different musical things that when I hear a title screen, I generally find, right? A lot of things that are going to create tension, suspense, excitement in your games. And you'll notice some of the music theory things that here I introduced are you can use in any musical context, like ostinatos or syncopation, right? You can talk to your students about the rhythms, have them maybe learn those, transcribe those. One here is specifically for jazz. Kesh is something that you hear a lot of music theory textbooks for jazz mention. So if you're teaching jazz to your students, you can talk about that. Let's go ahead and we'll start with this title screen theme for Super Tennis, and then we'll go through and listen to a few other games. So enjoy. All right, so that wraps it up pretty much. This is my contact information again. So if you have any questions or really any thoughts, if you're thinking, hey, I actually teach video game music a little bit differently to my students, or we talk about music theory in this way, please reach out to me. I love hearing about that type of stuff. So once again, thanks for having me at the conference, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.